Howdy friends, Brian Flechsig of Mad River Outfitters and the Midwest Fly Fishing Schools, and welcome back to another episode in our Getting Started in Fly Fishing program. And today we're up to number 4 on the list, and that's flies. Now we start getting into the fun stuff. Today we're going to break this down into some basic nomenclature for you of some of the basic categories. In the future, we will be filming our Entomology 101 class for you here on YouTube, and there we'll get into details on the life cycles of the bugs, info about the different bugs themselves and how they behave. But for now, you as a beginner, you need to understand some basic differences in the different categories of flies, the nomenclature that goes along with them, and you need to just get yourself a handful of flies. Of course, consult your local fly shop or us here at madriveroutfitters.com. Get yourself a handful of basic flies, tie it onto a proper leader, and get out there and go fishing, okay? But let's keep in mind, you've heard me say this before, your fly is your number one most important piece of gear. If your fly doesn't look right and your fly doesn't behave right, nothing else matters. Your fancy fly rod, your Gucci fly fishing jacket, none of that is going to do you any good if your fly sucks. So, that being said, let's take a look at some of the basic categories. And the word dry fly. The word dry fly is exactly as it sounds. They float. Dry flies float on the surface. And dry flies are usually imitating adult or winged aquatic insects after they have hatched from the nymphal form, and now they're the adults that we see flying around or floating on the water. So it's the adult form of the aquatic insect, but it could also be terrestrial insects like grasshoppers, ants, beetles, crickets, even mice can fall into that category. If a mice were to drop into the river, he's going to be on the surface of the water, and that can theoretically be termed as a dry fly. Okay? Your next term is going to be nymph, or you'll also hear wet fly. A nymph or a wet fly sinks. It gets wet. Nymphs are the immature form of the aquatic insects. They're in their nymphal or their larval stage where they're living on the bottom of the stream, and that's where the fish are going to most encounter them. So nymphs and wet flies, subtle difference between a nymph and a wet fly, and we'll get into that later, but for the most part, you're either imitating the nymphal form, the larval form, or maybe a wet fly as it's emerging, what we call emerging when it's swimming to the surface to become the adult aquatic insect, okay? And kind of last but not least in this main category is the word streamer. And streamers equal bait fish. Remember this when it comes to fly selection. All fish eat other fish. And all fish can and will eat other fish 1/3 their body size on a regular basis. So the lesson to be learned there is you can always fish a streamer or a bait fish imitation, and you can really hardly ever fish one that's big enough, okay? So if you're ever standing on the side of a body of water wondering what fly to fish, remember that all fish eat other fish, okay? So that's kind of 3 main categories. Your dry flies float, aquatic insects or terrestrials. Nymphs and wet flies sink, and they're imitating the immature form or the emergent form of those aquatic insects. And then streamers equal bait fish. Now, you can kind of get into pike flies and bass flies and things like that. Pike, bass, muskie. Those can kind of fall into their own categories, but primarily those fish are going to eat other fish. So most pike flies and bass flies imitate other fish, bait fish. But there could be frogs, mouse patterns, and some of those could be dry flies that are fished on the surface. Some of them could be subsurface. They also, you might get into realistic flies that actually look like the real thing. You look at it in a fly shop and you'd swear it's a real frog, or it might just be an attractor type fly. For example, Sneaky Pete, or a Boogle diver that we sell here at the shop. It's chartreuse. It doesn't look like anything found in Mother Nature, but it's one of the world's best bass flies, and it just gets their attention. It just looks like something that they want to smash or eat or whatever it might be. So keep that in mind too, that you've got realistic flies and attractor type flies within each of the categories, really. And then when it comes to saltwater flies, really easy. Here's what I tell people. Go to Red Lobster, open the menu at Red Lobster, and that's what your saltwater fly box should look like. You should have some fish, you should have some shrimp, you should have some crabs, and if you're fishing in the Northeast especially, you should have some squid. So just like the menu at Red Lobster, fish, shrimp, crabs, squid, that's what your saltwater fly box should look like. These are almost always going to be wet flies fished below the surface. Very rarely are you going to catch saltwater fish on the surface. So there you have the kind of the basic nomenclature on flies. Dry flies, wet flies and nymphs, streamers, and then you kind of break it out by species and saltwater flies. So really pretty simple. Like I said, consult your local fly shop. Give us a call here at the store. Tell us what you're fishing for and where, and we can always, or your local fly shop can always put together a basic selection of flies for you to get out there on the water. And then somewhere down the road, tune into our Entomology 101 class, or come here to the shop and take it with me in person. And then you can advance and learn a little bit more about this. Another great way to learn about flies is go to our website. Go to MadRiverOutfitters.com and start scrolling through the different categories of flies. We're going to tell you why we sell that fly, what we use it for, maybe even a little bit on how to fish it. So as always, thanks for tuning in. Be sure to tune in for the next episodes, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thanks for watching.